Okay. Go ahead and can y'all hear her? Okay, go ahead and say something,
Hello,
Katie.
everybody. Thank you for being here. Sorry for all my technical difficulties.
Hold on a second. I'm getting that phone call. Can y'all hear her? Okay, just let me know that you can hear her, and we'll go ahead and begin.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, they can. Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'll turn the mic up a little bit so she'll be a little bit better. And let me adjust this mic. All right. So, um, joining me today, you guys have heard me talk about Katie, the sister of Tim Guilford. Guilfoy. I always call it Guilford.
Yeah.
Guilfoy.
It's Guilfoy.
Guilfoy.
There's Gil and a foy after it. Guilfoy. Yes.
Guilfoy. Thank you. I'm always getting last names wrong because I don't know. I'm just used to common last names where I grew up, and we're not used to saying the oddly names. But welcome, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing Tim's story and being an advocate. And I want to start at the beginning. This is a very long, very layered process. So it means the world to me that you have picked me to take the time to get the word out about what's going on.
Thank you for picking this up and for all of your interest in it. This is really what we need at this point in this story is eyes on it and people to listen. So thank you.
Thank you. So I had started out talking about how Tim and Jennifer met. So we're caught up on that, and we're up to the point where he buys the house, and then they move into the house. And she's got 3 daughters. And what were their ages at the time?
Well, from the beginning of the allegations to the end, it was basically anywhere from 6 years old to 13. So when at the time of the allegations, I believe it was 9, 10, and 12.
Okay.
I think.
And in between the time that they were at the apartment building until the time that she moved into the home, were there any issues between them up until that point?
No, they had a pretty good friendship up until that point. It wasn't necessarily a super close friendship. Like you said correctly, Tim had the internship in Nashville, and after Nashville, he moved back to St. Louis. He got a job at that point doing marketing basically around the country. And so he would have a truck that he would drive and go to towns all over the place. And so Nashville, Clarksville was one of those towns. And so he would drive through and see Jen as well as other people that he was friends with in Nashville and Clarksville. So that was basically their friendship in between those times. Is they were in touch, they got along, visited every once in a while when he was in town, but they really got into responsibility with each other when she approached him about renting a house from him.
Right. So let's talk about when this stuff. Let's just assume everything's great. She's in the house with the kids. We're going to talk about motive at the end. We're going to keep that in our pocket. Because I want to start with what happened to your brother. So we are. Can we talk about how the investigation into your brother Tim even began?
Well, yes, we started. The first we heard about it was when he got arrested. He was arrested March 25th, 2009. And moving back from there, Jennifer Astle sent in a 911 call. She called 911 on March 18th because she needed to get him in prison pretty immediately. So she had 3 daughters, and they all, at one point or another, made allegations against him. A detective came into the situation and got Jennifer to make a controlled phone call where Tim would not know that he was being recorded by the police. and that he was being monitored for anything that could be considered an admission or a confession to a crime. And so after that phone call is when that police detective cherry picked a whole bunch of things that he said, rearranged them, put it in an arrest warrant, and then got the arrest warrant to take Tim into custody.
The 911 call is interesting. Did you ever get a copy of that 911 call?
It is very interesting. We should have, but when we asked for the 911 call, we were denied it, not really given a reason why. And we did do a Freedom of Information request, the FOIA request, and we're told just last year, we did our last one last year, that the 911 call has been destroyed by whoever had the custody of it. The state has had the custody of it from the very beginning. So we are aware of the 911 call, but we have no idea what was said on it. We've never heard it. We should. It's illegal for us not to have had that, for the state to have not given it to us.
Chat, has anybody ever heard of a 911 call being destroyed by the state? Do you find that odd? Just a Girl Next Girl says, can they even legally destroy evidence?
Not legally. They can destroy it, though, and it's illegal. But at the end of the day, we don't have the 911 call. So they don't really get in trouble for that. They should.
As we first stated, Jennifer has 3 children, but Taylor and Jasmine seem to be the focus. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, it goes back to this being a really complex case from the beginning. So the one mother basically had the 3 primary accusers and the girls, and when asked, all 4 of them had their own set of accusations, and those accusations spanned from basically over a period of 3.5 years. During those 3.5 years, they moved from Nashville to Clarksville. And so that changes counties, moving from Davidson to Montgomery County, meaning that according to their dates, some of those allegations were in one county and some of them were in another county. So Davidson County, Nashville, they decided to go first with their prosecution of Tim. And they, sorry, I got a frog in my throat. Sorry. And so that county had only allegations regarding Taylor and Jasmine. And so that's why they are the primary accusers. And the other charges in Clarksville, once they got the conviction in Nashville, they dropped the charges in Clarksville that had the allegations from the other daughter as well as Taylor.
I understand. So let's talk about March the 19th. We're talking about March 19th, 2009. Jennifer spoke with CPSI Parker, where Detective Fitting was introduced to as the investigator. In this conversation, Jennifer stated that the girls had revealed information to her and that she had pulled them out of school. Why is the school statement a significant part of this case? They are saying that she found out somehow and that she pulled them from school. Although we'll talk about in a minute how that story changes.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, on that date, pulled them out of school. The school statement is important because we only have verbal evidence in this case. There is no physical evidence whatsoever. So the verbal evidence is all about them reporting abuse at events, and also the only other story that they testified to is how the adults found out about the allegations. And so the reason why the school is important is because it was one of many stories about how Jennifer found out about the allegations and how she reported them. In one story, in the first trial, they found out from Brian Schiff, and so that fell apart. In the second trial, they leaned heavier on the guidance counselor. And they also leaned in the second trial on the fact that the girls went to school that morning and told their mom about the allegations before school. So one of the girls coming on Facebook now and saying that they didn't even go to school that day goes against some of their sworn trial testimony about the only story that can be really corroborated in their allegations, which is how the allegations were disclosed. If that makes sense. It's really confusing. There's so many moving parts to this.
Yes, and I've compartmentalized it all in my head to follow this map of madness here. She she has really done a doozy when it comes to changing parts of stories. One of the things that got me, and you guys tell me in the comments if this seems like it would be natural behavior. I don't know. I wouldn't act that way. But she said that the girls told her on the porch before school, waiting on the school bus. And then she just puts them on the school bus and waves goodbye. Have a great day. Now, who does that? If your children are out of the blue right before school on the front porch coming out with these horrible things that have happened to him, why would you then put them on the school bus and wave goodbye?
Yeah. And what happened in between that point and then when she did decide to go pull them out of school to call 911? There's a whole bunch of time in there that's unaccounted for. So yeah, she didn't tell the girls to get in the car and we're going to the emergency room, to get you guys checked out. It was see you later, go have a good day at school. That doesn't make sense.
Can we bring this part up? The other story was that they were at school and that they told the guidance counselor about these allegations, and that the guidance counselor called mom and said, this is what has happened. And then allegedly mom goes down to the school and pulls the girls out of school.
Yeah.
What is the problem with that? Can you let everybody know?
Well, the guidance counselor at the beginning in the first trial, they were relying so much on the story of Brian, the ex boyfriend of Jen's mother. That's crazy, but yes, they were so relying on his revelation of the abuse to Jen that fell apart. That in the second trial, they had to start all over again with the disclosure story, since the first one with Brian didn't come through. So the guidance counselor portion was bumped up in the second trial as a possible way that Jen could have found out. And so we needed to then say, okay, did this actually happen with the guidance counselor? And there were so many things that were thrown against the wall by the prosecution. This was just basically one of them, that their first story had fallen apart. So they came in the second trial with 3 new stories, and the guidance counselor was one of them. And so really sitting through the trial, you didn't know which story to follow, which is why we were feeling kind of confident when the jury went into deliberations on that second trial, because you just couldn't follow what they were talking about. So the guidance counselor story was the one story that they told in that second trial that we needed to get more information about. We knew that we could disprove that the girls told Jen in the morning before school. That didn't happen. We know that Jen testified that she didn't even talk to the girls before school about anything about Tim. So that story was proven false. The guidance counselor story, we just basically needed to see if the guidance counselor existed or talked to the girls at all. And we found the guidance counselor who was willing to say in an affidavit that there is no record of any girls talking to her that day or any other day.
That's interesting. Say, did the guidance counselor get deposed or called to testify in the trial?
No, did not. It was really a function of time that we did not have time at that point. The guidance trial, and the judge was not giving us any leeway on preparing anything during that trial like that would have needed. So no, we did not have a chance to get the guidance counselor in the trial during the trial.
Okay. Now,
and they also wouldn't give us the information about who the guidance counselor was. I should say that too. So we were not only denied school records, but just even the basic information about the guidance counselor. So we had to do investigating on our own to even track that information down.
and yes, and that took you years and and money and time, and you finally found the counselor. So great work on that.
Yeah.
Just last year. Yes. So this, you guys, this happened in, we're talking about almost 20 years ago now, and they were just now last year able to contact the guidance counselor. Now let's talk about this next part. 2 of the children were taken to a child advocacy center on March the 23rd, 2009. So if you're going through the timeline here, we are now some days after the initial report, and Jennifer takes the 2 children to child advocacy, it's called CAC, on March the 23rd for the forensic interview. And now I have read both interviews, and I found some major discrepancies between Jasmine and Taylor's forensic interview. You guys know, no, the guidance counselor didn't call CPS because the guidance counselor didn't know that there was an issue because she wasn't told by the girls. That's a non-existent event, so she wouldn't have anything to have called them for. I hope that answers your question. But Jasmine at that time was 8 years old. And then she expressed being glad to be at the CAC because her mom told her they would talk about, quote, stuff. And she had been waiting since last week. And can we talk about the forensic interview? Now, this is TikTok. We have to watch what we say. You have to say SA instead of actual, you know what I mean? And so trying to keep it where we don't get flagged. Can you talk about some of the discrepancies that I saw within those reports and what we've talked about?
Sure. It's actually easy to not talk about details of the essay because most of the discrepancies were more about who was where, when, with who, and what was happening. So at the beginning, I said, we had Jen, the mother, and 3 accusers. So we had 4 sets of events and dates that each one gave, and very few of them coincided with each other at all. So things like they would say that Tim touched them in the house in Clarksville, but it was the days that they were living in Nashville. So that was a discrepancy that was really easy to find. There was a lot of discrepancies about the details of the essay and where, and it mattered because some details would be really descriptive in terms of like what the pattern was on Tim's clothes or something like that. But then when you got to, okay, where did he touch you? It would be a different place each time. And the interviewer would summarize what the kid just said. And the kid would say, no, I meant this, or that's actually wrong. So there were never any really clearly defined events that happened in these forensic interviews, and definitely not ones that aligned with each other. And then some of them were just really just hard to believe. There was a lot of times that the kids would say that Tim was doing something to them or one of their sisters while other people were in the room, while other adults were in the room. And so when they would be asked about, okay, well, then what happened? And, they wouldn't have an explanation for that. And then they just move on to the next thing. So I think one of the things that's really important to understand about all of the accusations is that they just opened up a floodgate, and each one of them had probably a dozen different things that they at first said at that forensic interview, and the state had to whittle it down to 8 specific counts that they could identify from what they were saying in order to prosecute him. So the discrepancies were enormous in terms of their verbal testimony, but because there were 3 children, I think that the state thought that it was worth pursuing it anyway, even though because the chances with more kids are just better for conviction, and that's really what the state of Tennessee wanted in Tim's case, was just conviction. They wanted an arrest and a conviction, and they really didn't care about the truth of any of it.
They're asking, did the children have a guardian ad litem during any of this?
I'm sorry, did the children have what?
A guardian ad litem attorney?
No, since the mother was the primary accuser and in charge of it, she had custody of them all the time. So there was never a point where there was another guardian in the situation.
Excuse me, I've got the little coffee coughs too. At the time of the first event, I want to talk about a few of the discrepancies as best I can. Jasmine stated that it happened about when she was 6 or 7, but then Taylor recalled it when she was 7 or 8. So when and the ages and things like that change. And there was, he would go, and I've already explained this to them, but when he would go in town to work on his property or to work in town or whatnot, he would stay there at the residence because him and Jennifer were friends. And he understands now that he shouldn't have slept in the same bed, but he didn't consider it anything weird at the time.
Well, and I think it's very important too to point out that Tim never got into a bed with a child. All of these instances that the Astles are talking about, all of the allegations happened after one of the girls had joined him in the bed. So he was very aware that, once that happened, that was really dangerous for him, and he should have not gone over there ever again if that happened one time even. But he had a lot of misplaced trust in Jennifer and unfortunately made a bad decision there. Yeah. But never did he enter a bed with a child or intentionally sleep in a place where a child was.
Okay. There was another incident where they went on a camping trip. I want to talk about that for a second. So Jasmine recalled this camping trip for their 7th or 8th birthday at Rock Island, and she stated that her other sister were in one tent, and her other sister slept in a different tent with Tim, but nothing happened to her. But they also mentioned a camping trip and said that she stayed in a tent with Tim alone, but he did not do anything during that time. And so who slept with who, what, where, and why on that camping trip in itself is mixed up.
Right. Yeah. And I couldn't clarify too much fact on it because I wasn't on the camping trip, but just in general, in their original accusations and in the list that they gave to the police, there was all sorts of details about where Tim was sleeping with what child and that kind of thing that Jen would put in there. And none of it aligned with the dates or the times, and especially when I know we'll get to the alibis. But all of these details that they gave at the very beginning of their accusations, so many of them got blown away because they weren't true. And yet the prosecution kept going. The detective kept going and just using whatever manipulative tricks to the truth that they could try to show Tim to be guilty for.
So let's move on to a little bit later on March the 24th, 2009. Detective Fitting spoke to Detective Charles Fleming of the Metro PD on this day and explained the case and disclosures. And at that time, Fleming requested controlled phone calls if Jennifer was willing to do it, meaning that she was pretty much given a script on what to say to Tim when she called. And that was done. Tim didn't know he was being recorded. There were, I think, a total of 4 phone calls. Can you talk about the calls and why it's important to understand scripting and interviewing techniques?
Yes. The calls is one of the hardest things for me personally to relive, because from front to back, it's a torture session to get Tim to say anything that would incriminate him. And with him not knowing that his life was on the line, basically. The detective used what is called the read technique. And especially if I bet if you have a lot of the true crime fans here, many of you have probably heard of the read technique. It's REID. And it is a method that detectives use to elicit admissions and confessions from somebody they suspect to be guilty. And there's all sorts of techniques like normalizing things, minimalizing things, making bargains with the person, making promises, just saying, like, if you just say this one phrase, then everything will go away and everything will be fine, and you'll be free, everything will work. And so there's a lot of psychological tricks that happen in this. And Jennifer was during the testimony, the detective described it. She and Jennifer sat with the phone in between them, with a pad of paper in between them. And the detective just kept giving Jen lines to say. We went through in the trial to show the notes that she gave her. And there was one that just said, get him to make any admission and underline. So the thing about the read technique is that they say that it's a tool to find the truth about a situation, but really it's a tool to get admissions. And anyone that really studies the read technique has heard this critique of it, because you have to go in thinking that the person you're talking to is guilty. You have no room. They have nothing that they can possibly say to you that you would accept as a denial. Because in fact, and over these 3 phone calls, it took 3 phone calls for them to get Tim to say anything that they could turn into a guilty sounding statement. He denied, I think we counted, he denied that he did anything on these phone calls for, I think it was 68 times that he said, no, I didn't do it. Even when they were trying to bargain with him to say that he had done something, he said a lot of the time, like, you can tell the girls whatever you want, but I'm telling you, I did not do this. I did not do anything like this. And so there was all sorts of psychological techniques that Jen, with the detective's help, got him to think of, if it was possible that you thought you were dreaming in your sleep, that you were with an adult woman and actually you were with a child. Could that have happened? And all of these kinds of scenarios that any person that had a lawyer with them or knowledge that they were being interrogated by a police officer would have protected themselves against saying, but Tim didn't have that knowledge, and he also trusted Jen still at this time. And when she told him that, because she didn't come right out and accuse him, she said that the guidance counselor had told her that somebody had touched the girl. And so he had all of this concern for, oh God, somebody has hurt these kids that are good kids, and I'm broken up about that. So he treated it seriously. And then when the allegations moved towards Tim, you can hear it in the phone call of just the panic and the confusion and trying to get just his bearings about what reality is. So the phone calls, they were the only investigative tool used before they found Tim guilty, before the detective decided that Tim was guilty. And so any other motive at that time was not looked into. they just took whatever they could take off of what he said on the phone call and put it in the arrest warrant, and then went into full prosecutorial mode right after that. So the phone calls were, they were a legal tool, but they were also extremely psychologically manipulative and produces false confessions all the time. Tim never confessed at all, but he said certain words that they could clip and paste into an arrest warrant and make it stick for the time being. So that's what happened with the phone calls. Yeah.
Just the girl next door is asking, so they told the guidance counselor and she didn't report to CPS. It's my understanding that nothing was reported to the guidance counselor at the time that she was a guidance counselor for the school. At the time that they contacted her for an affidavit last year, near over 15 years had passed. So she wouldn't have had a reason to call CPS because she didn't know anything was wrong, because the story that the girls went to her and told her about this, and then she called mom to pick them up from school, is a lie.
Correct. Yeah. You were exactly right. There is nothing for the guidance counselor to report. So that's why there is no guidance counselor report to DCS or anybody else. It was just really made up out of thin air. And the reason why we had to go to the guidance counselor was to prove that that story was made out of thin air.
So the transcripts and audio CDs of the phone calls we just talked about were entered in as evidence, and redacted versions were used at trial, and issues were raised because of the redactions, including an out of context statement like you just said. In the first phone call, and we'll talk about one specifically to give them an example. In the first phone call, Tim says to tell them he is sorry and that nothing is their fault. And then Jennifer mentions Alexis, one of the children, saying it was me. And then Tim says he doesn't remember and wishes that he could. He says that he feels bad and calls it the worst thing that has ever happened to him. For me, reading this conversation, reading the transcripts of the phone calls, it seemed like he was more in shock in trying to help the situation and trying to help figure out what was happening to the girls. And really, she completely caught him off guard.
Yeah, that is exactly what happened. And you can definitely tell it from reading the transcripts. If you listen to the actual calls that were there, you can hear like his breathing just turns really shallow, and it's a panic of I think it's an innocent panic. It's not a panic of getting caught. It's a panic of, oh my God, what is happening right now? And so these things that he does say, he's just got a constant concern for the girls. And Jen keeps saying over and over again, I can't tell the girls they're liars. And so that's why Tim says in response, well, tell the girls whatever they need to. You need to, okay, tell the girls that they're not lying. But I'm telling you, every time that he would say something like that, he would qualify it with, I'm telling you, Jen, that I did not do that. I'm telling you that I do not remember that. So these kind of halfway admission statements that are made are almost always out of context, with them not following up with, okay, but then he does deny doing it, The redactions too, I just want to say one word about that. Yeah. When we talk about the forensic calls being redacted or anything else being redacted, most of the reasons for those redactions are because there were charges in 2 counties. And so when they were prosecuting in Nashville, they couldn't bring up anything that was alleged in Clarksville. So that was a really confusing thing to have all of these gaps, because they would mix in their talking, just the normal talking in the phone call and so on. They would mix all of the events between counties. And so when you're looking at the transcript or listening to it, these gaps, I know that sometimes gaps like that look a little suspicious, but the reason why that is in our case is because one county had to be redacted from the prosecution in the other county, if that makes sense.
On March the 29th, 2009, Detective Fitting spoke to DA, District Attorney Kimberly Lund in Missouri. Because remember, Tim had finished up his internship and he had gotten a job and he'd moved to Missouri. So he didn't live in the Nashville area anymore. And so one warrant was issued for the rape of a child, and it was issued with a $250,000 bond. And the defendant's information, Tim's information, was contacted at the Kirkwood, Police Department in Missouri. Within an hour, the sergeant and King contacted the detective and advised that they had him in custody. So you have to think about the whirlwind of Tim. He was friends with Jennifer, loved her family, gave her a home she could rent, and here we are within 6 months after them moving in, and he's in handcuffs. Can you imagine? Can you tell us about the day he was arrested? How did you find out, and what went down?
Yeah, the day that he was arrested, I was actually in St. Louis. I was living in Kansas City at the time, going to grad school, but I was back for a visit. I just happened to be. And I had gotten married 2 months before this. So my mind was all about picking out my wedding pictures for my wedding album. So that's what I started the day thinking about. And by the end of the day, it's like I still haven't gotten my wedding pictures picked out and put in an album in 2025 because it just became not important by the end of the day. Tim was picked up in Kirkwood, and we just had no clue. It was, like you said, a whirlwind for Tim. It was a whirlwind for us too. My dad told us, me and my mom had gone out for dinner with some of our friends, and when we came home, he told us that Tim was spending the night somewhere at a friend's, and we were like, okay, that's fine. And then he said, no, I got to tell you, he's in jail. And so my original thought, I knew that Tim had hung out with a lot of people that smoked pot, and like, oh man, he got nabbed for pot or something like that, And so when I heard the charge, I just knew right away it was Jen, and it was her. I knew that there was problems with her payment of rent, and I knew instinctively that she had done this, that she had put these girls up to this. And so that's just my gut reaction from when Tim was arrested. But it really was so fast. And one of the things that I learned before trial, there is actually a backup team in Clarksville where the charges originated here, called the Child Protective Investigative Team. And when an allegation like this happens, it's not only supposed to be the detective that does an investigation, but this particular team that does it. And if you look at what their process is, they are supposed to interview the accused and look at bank accounts and look at relationships and who had motives to do things. And they really go into it a lot. And their normal span of an investigation for this Child Protective Investigative Team is stated at 6 or 7 months. They say it takes 6 or 7 months to get a case like this to the grand jury. For Tim's case, it took 48 hours because this team didn't do a thing other than sign off on the detective's arrest warrant and said, yep, that's fine. So nobody ever asked him, no police ever interviewed him or offered to take a polygraph or an interview of any kind. It was the only investigation that happened in this case before an arrest was made were those phone calls. That was it. And it was too fast. There was just an immediate judgment by Detective Fittings that he was guilty and we were getting him in.
Now, everybody in the room, you're probably wondering, well, were the children tested? Yes, they were, and we're going to talk about that. The medical examinations for Jasmine and Taylor were scheduled for April the 21st, 2009. This was more than 72 hours after they had last contact with Tim, and the examinations were evaluations, and you know what kind. I can't describe it, but you know what I'm talking about. So they found the physical examinations were within normal limits. You know what I'm talking about. We can't talk. I'm trying to say this. You ladies know what I'm talking about, okay? I don't know how else to put that, but in normal ranges. And according to the detailed allegations of the events, there would be no way that those would be in a normal range if the events that happened really did happen. So I know that some people had asked, right? Thank you, Annabelle. Yes, physically. That's correct, physically. So that's a huge part of the evidence that I feel like they didn't even consider.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that I think is so remarkable about that, and it kind of goes what I was saying before too. I'm sorry, but if I had daughters that came to me and said, that man SA'd me, I would take them to the ER like in 5 minutes, in a heartbeat. You know, there'd be no waiting for a medical examination if it was my kids. But with Jennifer Astle, yeah, she waited a month before those kids saw a doctor at all. And I think it's important too that in one of the very first lists of allegations that were made by Jennifer, one of the dates that she said that contact probably occurred was March 16th, 2009. That date was written down, which was less than 72 hours from the 911 phone call. So, you know, that potentially, if there was bruising or something like that, that could have been found if she would have taken those girls into the ER. But for some reason, you know, if she hears that her daughters have been SA'd, it's not a priority for her to get those girls into a doctor and make sure they're okay. It was more of a priority on you mentioned the date, April 21st was the date that they went in for the examination. We were following what Jen was doing online at that time too, and she had a MySpace. And on 420, I think we all have heard what the 420 holiday is all about. She was talking about basically buying drugs and sleeping in. And this was the day before, you know, she was taking her daughters in for a forensic examination that would be especially, you know, traumatic in and of itself for her daughters. So just the lack of urgency on the behalf of Jennifer to get her daughters into the forensic examination. Also, the lack of the police. You know, the police didn't tell her to make sure that that her daughters were okay. They were okay with waiting a month. So that's just confounding to me because I don't know. I think you have said and on your show, and I can say too, I am a survivor of child SA and adult SA, and just to think that I could tell somebody and not be brought into the ER right away and not be taken care of physically right away, that's just insane. So that's what happened here.
So the trial begins. July 2011. It's been over 2 years since his arrest. The first trial ends in a hung jury. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, so I talked about a little bit before with Brian, the ex-boyfriend of Jennifer's mother, that was the original story of disclosure. That fell apart, and the jurors saw that happening. Also, just a lot of the stuff didn't make sense for what they were talking about with the calendar. At the beginning, I mentioned a couple of dates that Jennifer wrote down, but Jennifer wrote down many, many dates that she said this abuse happened on these dates, and I remember because of somebody's birthday, it was right around that time, and I remember this one because of that incident that happened. So she had discrete dates that she put down. And in the first trial in July, we were able to take all of those dates and find out where Tim was with credit card receipts. He was working across the country at that time. And I think that there were maybe 14 dates, and we had 13 alibi evidence witnesses and we brought them up on the stand. And so by the end of the trial, it was very, very clear that these dates that they had testified to, that they were very, very sure of, that Tim wasn't anywhere around at that point. So with Brian's testimony falling apart, with the alibi evidence that we presented, and also the girls just really didn't have very descriptive stories either. They were of an age where the prosecutor was allowed to give a lot of leading questions. And so there was never a point where the girls would like talk in a narrative sense about what happened to them. It was all just answering questions that the prosecutor asked them. And so it wasn't compelling in a way. And I think that what we heard back from the jury was that they just really didn't believe Brian, and they didn't believe the mom, and the alibi evidence was a problem. But they just didn't believe it happened. And then the ones that didn't vote for acquittal, the only thing that we got from that was that if he was sitting at that table for the defense, he must have done something, which is just a bias that I think a lot of people have, especially when you're talking about CSA, that can happen a lot. But yeah, I think that the alibi evidence was very, very strong in the first trial, and the jury saw through that pretty easily.
So I want to say something that she said. I want to say it again. 14 dates.
And I think it was 14. I'll have to go back and check on it. But yes, go ahead.
14 dates, 13 alibis. 70 years, no parole. Think about that. Think about that.
The second trial, they didn't have those dates like they had in the first trial. The first trial, she had those 14 dates. Second trial, they didn't have those 14 dates. They said that Tim did these over a period of this many months, this many years. So all of these alibi witnesses that we had for the first trial were really useless for the second trial because we didn't have any particular dates that we could say that he was in another town, another place. So the second jury, they did not hear that alibi evidence. They just were given the free rein that Tim could be found guilty from, I don't remember the exact dates, but from this date in 2008 to this date in 2009. So how can you present an alibi for, 4 months or whatever it was? You can't.
Is anybody else in here as outraged as I am right now, just based on the fact that we could present this in the first trial, but we can't in the second trial, which, by the way, the second trial happened on October 24th, 2011. And when going into this retrial, did he feel confident that he was going to win?
I wouldn't say we felt confident because we saw how willing the state was to bend their own rules. We knew that we were coming into a fight and our hands were tied in our back while they had, all of the ammo. So I wouldn't say we went in confident, but we went in with some strength because we had knocked down so much of their story in that first trial. I think the problem was that the state saw that our evidence was very, very strong in rebutting their evidence. And so in the second trial, they just basically started fresh on a lot of things with a new disclosure story and actually 3 new disclosure stories and no alibi evidence allowed in there. So we knew that we would have different battles to fight in the second trial. But yeah, it was really difficult. And I think this is true of any trial where you're going in as defense. you don't know what they're going to throw at you until you're there. So we could prepare as much as we could, thinking like how they're going to go. But yeah, we weren't quite knowing what we should be prepared for. So that was, I would say, we weren't confident, but we felt good about being able to get up there and show that they had problems with their case. Mm-hmm. They still do.
Yeah. So we make it through the second trial, and here we are, January 13th, 2012. That's when he was sentenced to the 70. And I know some of the charges they combined and whatnot, but 2 weeks later, on January the 31st, 2012, he hired new counsel and he filed for a motion for a new trial. And then on March the 9th, 2012, they denied that motion. Why?
A couple of reasons. First, they said that basically they weren't going to question the jury's decision of fact. So that's kind of the reflexive denial that they give everybody in cases where it really is about verbal testimony and the credibility of the witnesses. We got denied a new trial too, though, because we presented, do you want me to go into the tape now, the DVD? Because this is kind of where it comes in. We found out after Tim was convicted, we polled the jury, and we found out that they saw videos, DVDs in the jury room, and we had never seen these DVDs in court, during trial, before trial. I still haven't seen them. Tim still hasn't seen them. And the motion for a new trial in March is the first time that we brought up that we had heard that the jury was shown videos that were not on the record. And the judge just smacked that down. And the reason why he smacked that down, in my opinion, is because it happened in his court. And the person that showed the DVDs to the jury was his bailiff. So he was not wanting to get his bailiff in trouble. He was not wanting to admit that court procedures were not followed behind the courtroom doors. So yeah, he just outright dismissed it and didn't really give us much reason why.
Let me explain to them a little bit about this. So in 2013, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals made rulings in the appellant's first appeal, Tim's first appeal. During this appeal, the court considered the accusation that the jury viewed two videos that were not played during the trial. So you know how, when you sit down to ask a child, you know, that was videotaped, them responding with what happened to them and explaining what happened to them. I read the surveys from the jurors myself, and I saw myself, and in fact, I text Katie and I said the common theme here between all of these jurors, and then one of the reasons they, convicted him is based on these tapes, that they were just so convinced by watching these tapes. The problem is that the tapes were not entered into to discovery. They were not played in court. Excuse me 1 moment. They were not played in court. They were played for the jury during deliberations. This, based on that alone, I can't even. The court found it was an error for the state to give the DVD recordings to the jury, but noted, quote, "The record does not demonstrate that the jury ever watched these interviews. Yet, on December the 15th, 2016, the jury foreperson executed a sworn affidavit which became available. This affidavit is described as not only proving that the jury had watched both videos, but proving that the trial court had withheld the fact from Tim and his lawyers for 5 years. So for 5 years, they knew, and Tim didn't know. And I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is the United States of America, and I don't care if you think he is guilty or not. That alone is grounds for a mistrial.
Sure is.
The court said that because there was no indication the jury ever requested the equipment. I'm telling you, do you have information where? Can you tell us about the affidavit from the juror and what the juror said about these tapes?
Sure. Yeah. So the tapes, I think it's important to note, we knew based on the juror interviews that we did, we knew pretty quickly after the trial that these tapes were the reason why, that these tapes existed and so on. And these tapes had been denied to us all throughout. We had known that these, because it was the forensic interviews of the girls at the CAC center. So we knew that they had been taken. We asked for them in discovery. And at that point, the judge told us, no, we were not allowed to have copies of it. What we could do is view them one time in the DA's office. And Tim and I and his lawyers all did that prior to the first trial. And it was just all of the girls' accusations from front to back about both Clarksville and Nashville. But they said the reason why they wouldn't give it to us is because they said that they were not going to use them at trial. So only if they were intending to use them at trial were we able to get them. And they said, nope, we're not going to use them at trial, so you can't have them. And so at trial, they introduced them only as exhibits. So they introduced the exhibit, like basically the DVD, the physical DVD in the physical plastic case. They introduced that as an exhibit to the evidence, but they said, this is important too. They said, now there's no way that we can get a TV in the courtroom to play these videos. So we're just identifying them. Now that was a lie that the prosecution said, because they were able to roll a TV and DVD player into the jury room to show those. But they said in court under oath that they were unable to play those videos in court. So when the closing statement happened, the prosecutor looked at those exhibits and told the jury, now we have those exhibits there and you didn't see them. If you would like to see them, you can see them in the jury room. So we panicked and we said to our lawyer, let's ask for that. And basically what would have happened, what should have happened, is that the jury asked the bailiff to see those videos. The bailiff should have said to the jury, okay, write that question down, put it in writing. I will deliver it to the judge. We will get the court reporter in here. We will get the litigants. We will debate on whether this jury will be able to see this video. And they shouldn't have been able to, since we didn't get a copy of it to review and prepare and everything. But what happened instead is that the jury told verbally the bailiff that they would like to see the videos. The bailiff did not make them write that down or litigate it. So the record doesn't show that the jury saw those videos. The record only shows that they went back for deliberations and then came out with a verdict. So the videos not being shown, we still weren't able to get them. We weren't able to get a hold of those videos until the federal appeal that we brought on those videos, saying that, like you said, it should be a mistrial. It's easy. It's confrontation clause, Sixth Amendment to the Constitution, very basic, that you should be able to see all of the evidence that convicts you. Mm-hmm. Tim was not afforded that at all. And so we have taken that all the way up through the federal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied to listen to it. So that issue is legally dead at this point, which is ridiculous. It's like, we're in Gulag Russia, because you can be put away without actual evidence being shown to you. Tim's case proves. So, the videos are maddening, but the jury absolutely didn't take into consideration anything that happened into the courtroom, and saw all of those not aligning stories in the courtroom and ignored them because they were shown these videos in deliberations that basically were just completely uncontested stories that the girls were able to tell at the very beginning of all of this.
Oh, man. So, because somebody had just
You asked me about the foreman. I didn't finish that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we first talked to the jury, a lot of them didn't want to talk to us, understandably. But the foreperson, once she kind of, it seems like she kind of did some research into the legality of what happened on her own, and she realized that that was really, really unconstitutional what happened. And so she was willing to do the affidavit in, I believe it was 2015, that all she really said in it was, yes, we asked to view the videos and the bailiff brought it in and we watched them. And that's all that she said. But like you said, with the interviews, that is what they based their verdict on and not what happened in the courtroom.
That's right. And that's why it's so significant, because it was the overwhelming common denominator between the juries. And you're talking about an edited video that, the defense wasn't allowed to see. That's an issue for me. So and I hope I'm saying this right, I'm not a legal person. The quorum nobis, am I saying that right?
Yeah, it's called the error quorum nobis.
Quorum
so
nobis.
What that means is basically like new evidence that we found. And so that affidavit from the jury foreperson was considered new evidence. And we were denied that based on, it was the trial judge that we had to go in front of. So this was the same judge that had the bailiff that did this in the first place. So he was not inclined to be kind to us at all. But he misread one of the evidentiary statutes of Tennessee to say that the jury foreman could not testify about what happened in the jury room, even though it was about these videos and very much within the realm of what legally she could have testified about. But the judge shut it down there because it was his courtroom that was being pried into now, and he didn't like that.
They actually granted the state's motion to dismiss this on June the 23rd, 2017. So now we're up in 2017, if you guys are following along in the timeline. The court concluded that the petition was time barred because Tim was aware that the jury viewed the interviews as early as November 2011. But doesn't the judicial system take time? And was the decision they really said because he took too much time? Is that what they said?
It is, and it's also, they waited out the clock, basically, because they knew that these videos were there, too. Like, it was common knowledge that these videos were there and shown by the time we found out after the conviction. So it was really kind of this battle between, everybody in the case knows these videos were watched by the jury, but it is not on the record of the case. And so since it wasn't recorded properly in the trial transcript and court transcript, then it didn't happen. That's what the courts are saying. Since you didn't get this affidavit immediately after the conviction, it didn't happen. And the actual new information that we had at that point too was the lack of the written request. That was what the new information was. We knew after the trial concluded that the jury had watched these videos, but we didn't know how the jury got those videos put into the DVD player and turned on for them. And so what we found out that the new evidence was that Hillary Hoffman, the jury foreperson, requested verbally, and that verbal request was granted without litigating it in front of the judge and us. And they didn't accept that as new evidence. They said that's the same evidence, which it wasn't.
Okay, we've made it to 2020. These folks have been dealing with this for almost 20 years now. Can you imagine? I mean, we're wore out at listening to every time the state knocks them down before you can get up. And we've just been here talking about this about an hour. Mama, look, yes, we did reach 150,000 likes, and we have 135 souls in the room. Keep tapping. Now we're in June of 2020. A federal habeas petition was filed in federal courts. September 15th, 2021 comes by, and he files a whistleblower complaint against his court judge. Judge Monty Watkins is his name, accusing him of tampering with his jury by exposing them to additional information that was not evidence in his trial. In fact, Tim has said, and I quote, I've been sitting in prison for, at the time, of course, now it's more, 10 years now, and I've been through 2 trials, and I've never been allowed to see the evidence that they used to convict me. I wasn't able to object to it, defend myself against it, or even appeal the use of it by the state to convict me. Will, at this point, isn't this trial the one that's coming up in July of this year?
Okay, so not really. What the federal habeas petition, that involves the jury seeing those videos. And that legal point is now dead since we tried to get the Supreme Court to hear us and they denied us. So really what I think, and I'm not a legal person either, but I think what the only thing that will reopen that is if another juror comes forward that was sitting on Tim's trial and voted him guilty and comes and tells us about another irregularity, which there's a really good chance that more irregularities happen with that jury and the prosecution. So that is kind of the only avenue to reopen this video case. Now, what's coming up in July that we're going back to court for is new evidence. It's another error quorum nobis. That is the term legally. And it's new evidence that we just got. And so what that is about is the Facebook post that Taylor came on in January 2024 and basically started taunting us because that was when January 2024 was when our federal habeas petition got completely denied, when that issue went dead. And so it was a really sad time for us. And I went on our Facebook supporter page just to inform everybody about that in January 2024. And that's when the Astles decided to come on and start talking. And that is when Taylor, in particular, started talking about how they didn't even go to school that day. So that, I was able to get a screenshot of that chat. She and I went back and forth quite a bit, actually, on that Facebook comment page. But her saying that they didn't go to school that day is really, really important because if you recall with the second trial, they had several disclosure stories. They had the guidance counselor. They had the girls telling Jen before school and getting on the bus. They had Jen saying that they didn't talk about it before school, but she found out somehow and pulled them out of school. So going to school was a really important part of their disclosure story in the convicting trial. And if they're now getting on Facebook of their own volition and saying, you know, we didn't even go to school that day, what she's basically saying is, ha, 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 you're in jail. I lied. I'm lying now. I'm not honest, but I am seeing you stay in jail for, you know, this thing that I've done. Mm-hmm. And so after Taylor got on, then Jasmine came on, Jen came on. They all said some really nasty stuff to us, and then deleted all of their comments. So since I was able to get the screenshot, we're basically making them explain why they got back on Facebook and started changing their story. And I know it seems really, really small of a detail to say that that little sentence opened up a new appeal and new evidence, but this entire case was based on credibility of the Astles, of those specific 4 persons. And the jury convicted because they believed that those 4 people were telling the truth when they said that Tim did these things. So for one of those people to come on Facebook in our face and say, I lied, I lied, I didn't go to school that day. We didn't go to school that day. You know, that's my testimony, but we lied. It's really important that we get to the bottom of that and get her back on the stand to explain why she is changing her story.
So, Katie, why would Jennifer do this to Tim? Such a good friend.
Well, she wasn't a good friend. She was a very, very bad friend. This all has to do with money. This all has to do with $3,000 that Jen owed to Tim at the beginning of March for back rent. Tim was, his whole goal, he was working really hard. He was a very hard worker. His whole goal was to own properties that he could rent out to families, like single home properties. And so he bought one in Clarksville that he agreed to let Jen and her daughters rent. And it's very important that there was a lease. There was a lease stating that she could move in there and hold residency there for X number of dollars a month. And there were eviction discussions in that lease. It was a solid lease. And I still have a copy of it. And so she moved in October of 2008 and immediately just didn't pay rent. Just paid partial rent sometimes. I don't think there was 1 month where she paid full rent. And so that was October when she moved in. By the time we get to March, she's $3,000 behind. She had just lost her job that Tim had actually helped her get. She was lying to Tim that she had put money in the bank account that paid rent. And he was basically calling her out on it and saying, like, it's not showing up, and showing her screenshots and things like that. And so basically she got to the point where she didn't have any other option. She probably thought then to get him arrested as soon as possible. He told her on March 11th of 2009 that he needed the money for back rent, or he was going to start eviction proceedings. And March 18th was when the whole 911 phone call happened. He was in jail by March 25th. So she stayed in the house in March rent-free, having owed $3,000 already. She stayed in the house April rent-free, May rent-free. We know that she moved out sometime in June because he was able to actually get actual eviction proceedings and get her out of there. So she had this incredible motive to get him out of her hair, basically, and stay in this house as long as she could without paying rent. And the detective didn't look into that at all. She just believed that Jen paid rent. Jen told the detective, yeah, I'm totally paid up. And if the detective had looked into the bank account at all, she would have seen that that wasn't true. But this was all very, very monetary. And I think that there was a little bit of animosity with Jen too, because Tim was, pretty agreeable. They had a pretty agreeable friendship up until that point. And so for him to get tough with her and basically say, like, I'm not going to let you slide, I think she got real mad at him and told the girls, this is my speculation, but I think she at that point told the girls, you like staying in this house? Because we got to do something to stay in this house and go against him. And this is what we're going to do. So I think that's what happened. And money was a large, large part of that.
One of the person, just the girl next door, says, can her bank records be subpoenaed into court? And they were. I mean, they tried to show motive there, but the court wasn't buying it.
Yeah, we had the bank accounts. They're actually on Tim's website. We have freetimg.com. The bank account information is up there, and it kind of has some explainers too to show, like, this is the date this happened, this is the money that moved here and there. In terms of the investigation and the prosecution, they just didn't care. They saw this motive of Jen that was clearly a monetary motive. And the detective went from telling us, like, oh, we know that she's paid her rent, to, oh, it doesn't really matter that she didn't pay her rent. So they just really were not receptive at all to the facts of the monetary realities and the calendar of the events that happened in March of 2009. They just really didn't take that into account, again, because they were just pushing for conviction. They didn't care about truth. They wanted a conviction.
I'm just kind of looking around on the website here. I wanted to let everybody know it's free Timothy Guilfoy.com. And here's the website. They have so much information on this website, including videos, explanations, court documents, and just about everything that you can find. You can please follow Katie. Katie, if you're still in the room, comment and a mod, please pin. So everybody make sure you follow this account, Katie's account, because we want to keep track of this. I'm so upset that the Supreme Court wouldn't even listen to it. Like, I don't understand how the system, and I'm not saying, yeah, and somebody had asked this, yes, the girls are adults now. Yes, they will stick by their story for the most part because they don't want to get charged, I guess. I don't even know how that works. But here's the thing. You can't come on a public a Book of Faces group and say, "Oh, we lied. Well, this didn't really happen like that," and then expect nobody else to say, "Excuse me, can we start at the beginning and relook at this then? Because if that's a lie, what else were lies?" There we have overlooked. We have misconstrued phone calls, overlooked rock solid alibis, jury tampering, recanting of the stories, misaligned dates, times, places, negative grape kits. And this man is sitting in jail, most likely for the rest of his life. And for what? Money? Wow. Katie, I want to thank you so much for your time today and your willingness to sit and talk about this. And I commend you for the fight for your brother, for all of his constitutional rights. And I know everybody, you have a bunch of supporters in here. It's at God Has No Hair. It's a peculiar username. We've all been wondering why.
I gave Tim the option to choose it, and that's what he chose. And so with him being where he is, pretty much anything that he wants that I can do easily, I'm going to do it. So I gave him that one. I don't know what it means either. It's fine.
Yes, so if you look, you can go to the TikTok search bar and search for at God Has No Hair. That's the account that you need to follow. And let's see here. Mama Look wants us to keep tapping until we get to 175,000 likes. And I believe that you guys can do that before we leave. Jenny Brewer, and then it says the justice system in Tennessee is jacked up. I'm a Tennessee resident, and I have to agree. The first thing that I want to look at is where in the hay bale did the 911 call go? And I would like to see the statistics on how many 911 calls are destroyed in the state of Tennessee. Is there no hope at all for the Supreme Court? Will the Supreme Court hear this case if new evidence is presented, or is it just he might win on this or that or the other, but he's just stuck there forever and ever?
Pretty much, we can go back to the Supreme Court if we get to a point where that would be appropriate. With all of this, it really is now about getting people to come forward that know the truth about the trial, the investigation, and the things that went wrong with it. So at this point, it would take a juror, one of the jurors that convicted Tim, to come forward and say that something else happened that was irregular. It also would take one of the Astles coming forward and saying that their testimony wasn't true, which is exactly what our new evidence is from the Facebook post that we're going to be litigating on July 1st and 2nd in Nashville. So it's going to take whistleblowers, basically, to say this. I know this case of Tim Guilfoy, and I know that Tennessee did X, Y, and Z that were illegal against him. So the thing about the characters in this case, the detective and the prosecutor and a lot of the court officers and all of these people that really did not follow the rules, a lot of them aren't in their positions anymore. The judge got voted out. The main prosecutor is now in private practice. The detective is now an insurance agent, I think. So these were a lot of people that didn't do their jobs well. And so if there was a person that was around this trial during the time that the investigation or the prosecution were happening, that know that other policies were violated, that other laws were violated by Tennessee, I would beg them to come forward and give us an affidavit about that, because that would open up new evidence as well. So yeah, it's not that there's no hope. It's just that we have to keep digging and keep coming back to court and keep making the assholes responsible for the statements that they made and for the lies that they've told. So we're not done. We're not going to be done. We're going to keep going, because one of the hardest things in my whole life has been watching the railroading of my brother. And that was exactly what happened. Just taking the power of the state and manipulating it to get an outcome regardless of the justice of that outcome. Yeah, I could go on and on about that, but it's going to take people standing up and doing the right thing when the easier thing is to just keep quiet.
I wanted to let you guys know too that they are on the Book of Faces. Free Timothy. Let me make sure I want to say it like how I want to say it, but I want to get it right. Guilfoy. Guilfoy on the Book of Faces. All you have to do is search for that and make sure you join that group, because I'm sure she'll be putting up the updates there as well. And yes, Just a Girl, you are correct. We have to make a lot of noise to start getting more awareness. And that is part of this episode. And I'm going to be pulling the audio from this episode as my next podcast. And you can listen to me wherever major podcasts are heard. I'm on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and more. So you can go back and listen to this. And if you're a subscriber of mine, a whole entire folder I have made on this case is in Discord under the Tim Guilfoy folder. I have put in pretty much the information a lot of you read to get prepared for this show. And Mama Look says, hey, we reached 175,000 likes. Thank you guys so much. This could not be possible without you. You are the people who make the noise. And that's when people start listening, is when noise is made. So it is up to you to decide how you feel about this case. I am not trying to sway you one way or the other. What I'm asking you to do is take a look at all of the evidence and listen to this episode again, and listen to, we didn't even get into a fourth of it. We literally could be on here for weeks talking about this, but for the gist of it, I think we have in your mind that in this country, you should be convicted on without a shadow of a doubt. And to me, there was just too many doubts in this story, and I feel like Tim has been wrongfully convicted.
I do too. Thank you, Steph. It's been so wonderful having your attention and really your scrutiny, and I invite scrutiny completely from everybody. I would totally doubt the innocence of Tim too, just looking at the outside of this case, but it really is an injustice from top to bottom. And I'll just say too, we are going to be in Nashville next week. A week from today is the status hearing for the main hearing that we'll have in July. So next week is not the one that we want everybody to come to. If you want to come to it, it's Nashville Courtroom 5A at 9 a.m., but you certainly don't need to. What we really like for most people, if you are able to travel to Nashville, or if you're already there, July 1st and 2nd are when we have the main hearing. And so that's when evidence will be presented, witnesses will be called, and it's really going to get deep into what happened here and getting into the veracity of the assholes and the conviction itself. So if you want to come to that, please let me know that you're coming so that I can look for you, or you can just show up as well. But there will be a good contingent of Tim supporters July 1st and 2nd in Nashville, so please join us. And also just keep asking questions. You know, I get nervous only because I want to make sure that I'm saying everything 100% correctly and truthfully, but it's easy to be truthful when you just have one story and it's the truth. So I invite questions if you have them.
All right, Katie, thank you so much for your time, and I'll be keeping in touch with you, and I know that you'll keep me updated, and I am keeping you and your brother and your family in our thoughts and prayers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Steph, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, everybody, I appreciate you listening today. It really means the world to me. This entire episode, including the podcast audio from it, will be available for you to listen and watch to. Again, not that I know of, just a girl. Not that I know of. It's really, really wild. So, oh my gosh, there are still so many questions in this case. This is just the beginning. I feel like we need to get somebody had asked if there is a petition. I don't think so, but I will ask her if there's a petition. I will put it on my link tree. If you want to find everywhere that I am, I now have a link tree. That link is on my TikTok profile page. That will take you everywhere you need to go, including listening to the audio podcast audio of this episode. All right, you guys, you're making my dreams come true right before my eyes. You know that I love each and every one of you very much. Thank you for always supporting me. Make sure you follow me on any social media platform. All you have to do is look for the same username and logo. Find me especially on YouTube, and I'll see you there. I'll be live again in the morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a great day and be kind to one another.